Thank you for joining us for our third webinar on personalized learning. I'm your host, Darren Phillips. Once again, a big welcome to everyone joining us from around the world. It's been exciting to bring you this webinar series. It's proven to be extremely popular, as it would seem the teacher voice around the world has been asking questions and deepening their interest in personalized learning. I shouldn't be surprised about the popularity, than the fact that I'm joined by two such capable and eminently interesting characters in the personalized learning space, Allison Zmuda and Kate Bean. If you tuned into our previous two webinars, you will know that in the first webinar we spent time exploring the rationale of personalized learning and some of the outcomes we can expect in examples in practice. And Allison has reframed the remainder of our webinars around the 4 C's from the student point of view. So in our last webinar, webinar number 2, we focused on clarity. How can we help students focus on a task purpose and how it relates to the broader aims of schooling? So our presenters, and with the help of our audience discussion, we discussed not only the standards, but how to leverage those standards to create a meaningful, personalized learning experience for students. Now, if you're upset that you missed webinar number 1 or number 2, you can always find those videos on the YouTube channel, and my associate Christy will share in the crowdcast in the chat channel. In this webinar, as in all the others, we encourage you to ask those questions of our guests, and if you wish to do so, please log into that crowdcast and ask now. So today, in our third webinar in the series, we're going to focus on context, the underlying shift that's required to take us towards co-creation and the opportunity for students to work with educators as learning partners to have an increased stake in the what and the how of schooling. Now, if this is the first webinar that in the series that you've tuned into, you'll recognize Allison Zmuda as renowned author and thought leader in education today, who has a passion for her students, and it's her innovative spirit that she was inspired to create her first book in 2001 and 6 more since then. And it's her most recent book titled Learning Personalized: The Evolution of a Contemporary Classroom that has our attention today. So good evening, Allison. Great to have you with us again.
Good evening, Darren, and welcome from Madison, Connecticut.
Great to have you here. Now, if you've read Allison's book, and if you haven't, I strongly recommend that you do, you'll find that Allison's not only thoroughly explores the subject of personalized learning, but what makes the book so well put together is that she gives us such useful and practical examples where the theory is put into practice. Some of the most illustrative examples in that book come from Avison Charter School's Personalized Mastery Learning Models and Plans, which leads me to introduce our second presenter, Kate Bean. Kate is the founder and executive director of Avison Charter Schools, which is one of the few U.S. public schools focused on personalized mastery learning for grades K-12. At Avison, Kate is realizing the dream of where students of all cultural and socioeconomic and academic backgrounds are reaping the rewards of a state-of-the-art education at a typical school budget. So thanks very much for being here once again, Kate.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Clearly, I need a new profile picture or a new shirt because I think I'm wearing the same one.
There you go.
Yeah.
We'll have to mix them up the next time round.
Yeah,
So.
Yeah, but I'm happy to be here.
Well, fantastic to have you both. I'm just going to go back and show that we're framing our webinar today on context. So it's really about why does it matter? It's a question, obviously, from the student perspective in personalized learning. And I believe much of what we're going to talk about today is about finding those things that really interest students that they care about. And so I know we have our dreaded icebreaker questions, Kate and Allison. So to get us into that coffee chat of this, here's my question for you. What has your interest right now from a personal perspective? What's got you inspired? You know, what are the things that you're working on? And I'm going to make a little qualifier on this one. I don't want you to use the words personalized learning, and I don't want you to use the words education. So outside of personalized learning, what's interesting you right now? Kate?
You know, I'd have to go with my daughters. Both of them are teenagers, so that in and of itself is quite a feat, just day to day. And but they really inspire me. I mean, just a lot of things inspire me. But one quick anecdote is last weekend. I love cooking, so that does inspire me too. And my youngest daughter Avery was on YouTube and checking out different videos. She always likes to cook something that somebody's cooked on YouTube. So she found a cake in a mug. You cook a cake in a mug in the microwave. And
Yep.
what was really cool, she made it. It was really not bad. And then she did it again the next day. And then she started thinking, I'm going to open a restaurant, which was amazing to me. She's, just almost 13. She'll be 13 in a month. And she's like, wow, what if I just open a restaurant of cake in a mug and call it that? And, I mean, I just don't think I would have thought that way at 13. But I just think it's pretty amazing how kids think really out of the box. And maybe it's technology, but they just think beyond themselves a lot more. So a lot of people don't like technology with teenagers, and they think it's too much, and it can be. But I think it's really inspiring to watch them see that they are part of a bigger world than themselves, and that's clearly not where I was at 12 going on 13.
So technology is inspirational and cake in a mug. So we got that.
Cake in a mug.
I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So Allison, what's got you inspired? What's interesting you right now?
So I've actually been doing a brand new habit for going on 7 days. So this was my 7th day today. I was inspired by reading The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And what she says right out of the gate is you have to
Oh, I think we might have lost Allison.
I think we may have. I think it.
Well, she's out of The Artist's Way. She started down that road.
Yes. Yeah, I think she's remote right now. She's not at home, so.
So she's in Madison. I know she's in a hotel room there, but I'm going to continue this conversation because she's going to pop back in a second. But I guess the reason I asked these questions about you personally, because I thought this was really germane to the conversation today, Kate, isn't this the essence of the webinar today about context? Isn't it the challenge to find where the students are finding inspiration and go with that, trying to find where their inspiration comes from?
Absolutely. I mean, that's really the whole, when you just boil down personalized learning, or as we call it, personalized mastery learning at Davidson, it's truly all about relevancy. And if it's relevant to the student based on what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, and we'll talk through more of how you go about that in this webinar, but that absolutely is the key. And I think that's the difference between what we think of as traditional, although it's not a great word, but the kind of learning that we experienced as we grew up. There was a lot of questions of us when we were younger about, what are you interested in, what you'd like to do. There was a list of things to do and to accomplish, and that we would be tested on. But I cannot think of very many experiences where I was asked what I was interested in or passionate about. And the ones I do remember, I really remember. The teachers that did that are the teachers who stood out for me and helped me realize that I loved leadership and I loved working in that capacity, and so that is what shaped me. But that was really one out of many teachers who took the time to do that.
So it seems that my icebreaker aside and how that moves is it's about finding and exploring. Do you find that when students are faced with this that they have a hard time finding those things that are inspiring to them, that they are interested in?
I think it can be hard for some students. At Davidson, I think if students have started with us at such a young age, maybe in kinder, they're just used to us asking those questions and not just, they don't know any other way. But I think for students and for educators who may just be starting to go down this road of personalized learning, you may find that you actually, jump off that diving board, right, and say, I'm going to jump right into this pool of interest and passions with kids, and I'm going to ask questions. And you may find that they're not as receptive immediately, mostly because they've never been asked. And also, they need some help with that. And we're going to talk a little bit later about sentence starters. And, kids actually need to be taught the skill of articulating their passion and interest. I know that sounds silly. You think it would just come, right out. But you literally have to teach the skill of thinking about your passion, your interest, how to frame that into a really great, what we call driving question. So, so educators need to, if they're jumping into this, they need to really not be discouraged if they start to go down this road and they find that the kids are not the most interested thought partners immediately. But if they just keep with it, they'll find that kids will start to trust, like, wow, you really do want to know what I'm interested in. You are helping me craft a question that is more relevant to me than the question that was provided to another student. And then you'll really catch their interest, I think.
Okay, I'm just going to check for a second. Allison, are you back?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. So we can't see you, but we can hear you very clearly. So great. Great to have you back.
Fantastic.
So I'm not sure if you heard Kate and the conversation, but I'd like to get your input on this in terms of context. I'll just frame that for you to make sure that you heard where I went with this. Isn't this context? Isn't this what we're talking about in terms of the icebreaker that I had today? Isn't it about trying to find something that's interesting and framing that up? Isn't that the essence of context?
Yeah, and so I think part of the essence of context is not just asking kids what they're interested in, but also broadening their horizons a bit. So you can think about broadening your horizons within the scope of your own content area. So when you're thinking about biology, you can start asking kids questions about what they're interested in relation to when it comes to their own family's health. Are there concerns they have about themselves or their loved ones related to a medical problem? And I think, so as a case in point, my son is a type 1 diabetic, and he's in a biology class right now. I think it would be incredibly valuable and important for him to be able to figure out, why did my pancreas crap out on me? Why can't it produce insulin? And to what extent do I have hope in the next 5 or 10 or 20 years for a cure? And so that's the kind of thing that I am incredibly opportunity to take action on in his biology class. At the same time, I know that he only so far has had a biology question that was on a unit test around a diabetic patient, and he had a chart, patient A and patient B, and then he had to figure out which one was a diabetic. And so I think that's the kind of hope that I still have for teachers, is to really think hard about what are the problems and challenges that students are facing right now, specific to their coursework, but at the same time, how do we give them the opportunity to make sense of it in real time as part of what, quote unquote, counts in their classroom.
Kate, can I ask you maybe more a practical example? And thanks for that, Allison, of really framing up context for us. I'm almost thinking of my middle schooler, this poor guy. All the time I bring him up. If you ask him what he's interested in, he'd just go, I don't know. There must be some process in framing this all together and really expanding that.
Yeah, there is, and I think there's no better way to do it than just through a project. Project-based learning, projects, which is not, a new idea to anyone, but I think a good project, just the idea of project, as soon as a kid hears that, I think they at least think like, oh, this may be more than something that's just in a book. It might be hands-on. It might be something I create. But it's the framing of that project. When you start out and frame the whole relevancy piece of why this project, and Allison's right, you can go at it both ways. The teacher can bring the relevancy or bring the relevance to it by knowing the teacher's thinking, I have to really hit these learning outcomes, but I do want to make it relevant to my students. So let me start to conference or talk to certain students and see if there are interests, like she gave a great example with her son. So that's one way to do it. And the other way is to get students themselves developing their own driving question. And the reason why we call it a driving question, because it drives the learning. It drives a student to want to learn it, to want to do the research, to want to make the analysis of the data, and to want to take action, and to want to communicate what they found in that project to someone else. So it really can go either way, but you find a student has a huge passion area and interest, you can sneak in all of the other learning outcomes that you want them to have. If the student doesn't, and they're, you know, like you said, a typical middle schooler, it's like, I like video gaming. You could try to, you know, it's kind of cliche when people say, oh, just go with the video gaming. And you can absolutely create a project that way. But that's not always something that can work. So teachers say, I know he needs to learn this, but let me make it relevant in some way to the student without, so that they'll buy in. And I think it's all through that driving question. I think I have a couple of slides. I don't know, Darren, if you kind of show it, that project template that we have, and it literally shows you how. So at Avis and charter schools, as you see on this slide, this project organizer starts right out with whatever topic. So it could be a science topic, a history topic. This is just one that we use. So it could be topic generated from a teacher or a student, but immediately you get right into that driving question. And that's the key. And I know, Allison, you could probably add a little bit more on how important that driving question is.
The driving question is huge. And again, whether it started from a content topic that teacher needs to cover, or it starts from a student curiosity or a wonderment or idea, it leads down the same path. I think a driving question is a question that comes from the heart. It's sort of an itch that needs to be scratched. And I think the other major piece of this, the curiosity or the driving question, begs to be researched. And again, I'm not just talking about traditional academic research. It really does require observation and garnering background knowledge and seeing outside points of view or getting more context. So I think the other piece of it is the power of a driving question to start out with is fabulous, but the driving question does continue to be fine-tuned. So to make sure that it is continuing to be relevant and purposeful for what the student is trying to make sense of.
Yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be static. It should be something that progresses as the student begins to research, begins to weigh perspectives, and start to develop opinions about where they think the project might be leading. And that can be done. And as you scroll down a little bit, Darren, you know, the driving question turns into these essential questions. And these essential questions can end up changing the driving question. Because as you start to research and find the sources and find the answers to these essential questions, it can end up, and this is what's so beautiful about personalized learning, is this could end up going in a completely different direction. But how great of a journey is that to watch a student really catch fire onto something else and then end up going on their own off into a different direction, which is fantastic. So as you see, and this is a template. Yeah, go, Allison.
No, I mean, I want to build on what you just said, Kate. So the project planner really does illustrate the power of personalized learning, as Kate suggested, and this is a fabulous template for you all to take a look at and play with and see to what extent might it work for you immediately, or in what ways might you tweak it or tailor it. But it really speaks to the 4 major attributes of personalized learning. I've been working with Benna Kalick over the past 6 months, and she and I are really trying to hone in on what makes personalized learning distinct. So the first piece is the notion of co-creation, right? And that's pretty consistent with, can you hear me okay still, Darren?
Yeah, you're still fine, Allison, from my end.
Okay, so co-creation is one of the first attributes, and we've talked about that a little bit. But the second attribute that Kate's set of essential questions speaks to is one of the notion of self-discovery, right? The student can actually see their growth, not just in accumulation of background knowledge, but also intelligence over time. The third piece is the notion of social concern. So the idea is that personalized learning, project. Um, whatever form it comes into, it really is an indication of what they can do with other people. So they're networking, whether it's live, whether they're engaged in other resources, to actually create something shoulder to shoulder with other experts, peers, etc. And finally, the fourth attribute is really about voice. And again, the notion of student voice is absolutely huge. And so the power of a student to actually articulate a question is a demonstration that the teacher in Kate school, the teacher advisor, really is respecting the child enough so that they want to figure out what is it that they're interested in and aiming for.
Yeah, and I think, so Darren, if you scroll down, I think you actually will literally see the steps that Allison was talking about, and you move into the place where the student is taking kind of an informed action. That's that social piece that they're going to have some kind of effect on somebody, around them. They have to do something with it. This also is, I think, teenagers today, I mean, I keep going back to teenagers maybe because of the opening story I told about my daughter, but I think they're so ready to take action and do things. I think we sell them short. But once they get really excited about something, they're ready to jump in. And then, of course, the communicate piece on our template speaks to what Alice is talking about also, that the kids need to have a voice, and they want to know that what they have done, they want to be able to communicate that in some way. So they can share it in multiple, and of course they know, they have much, back to my inspiration, so much more access to technology and how to share that immediately with, literally millions of people if they wanted to. And then finally, of course, the reflection is key. For them to go back and take the time after that complete process, project-based process is over, and to reflect on that learning, reflect on, did my driving question change over time? Did I find an interest? Did I disprove my original theory of what I thought the answer was going to be, and it went in a wholly different direction? Did I have an effect on anybody with my project? These are questions that are really strong in a reflection piece.
Yeah, I've just got a question on that one, and maybe this really will move along in the context piece as well. And I'll relate it back to your example, Kate, is that you gave the example of a restaurant in a cup, cookie in a cup as a.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is if you let this go, without any experience in this, how do you know that the students' ideas are worthwhile of the time and the attention and the resources that's going to go into? Do you pursue every idea, or how do you put those bounds on, or do you?
Go ahead, Alice. You want to take that, or you want me?
Yeah, I mean, so Kate, I'm going to go first. I think it's a real question of time and attention and how much it correlates to a traditional course teacher's job. So it depends on different frames. If I am doing this in a business hour, there is a significant amount of latitude that's very different from doing it in a biology class or an Algebra 2 class or a U.S. history class, where it needs to be bound by a set of parameters that are driven by the content. So the answer is it depends. I think the real question is continuing to give students the opportunity to at least acknowledge and record their curiosities, regardless of what space they're in. Similar to what I do every morning when I wake up. So you're journaling for a few minutes. It's a habit. You can also do that level of journaling in school, whether it's in a notebook or it's online. Continuing to archive questions that you find fascinating in the moment so that you can actually reflect back on them and take it out for a test run when you have that opportunity to review.
Yeah, and I can jump on the word or the phrase "it depends." Everyone who's about ready to head down this journey of personalized learning, that's going to be your answer almost every time someone asks you, "How do you do this?" How do you? There's going to be these big general questions we're used to asking as teachers and educators, like, well, how do I do that in my classroom, or how do I do this in my classroom? And it really, well, it depends on the students that are sitting in front of you, and more importantly, it depends on that student who's sitting in front of you. And it's a little nebulous, and it can be a little frustrating to not have the answers. And that's why things like this template, and I think there's a couple other things I wanted to show. Darren, do you have that next slide that shows how you actually develop a driving question? So you literally, going back to Allison's first piece of the 4, is that collaborative effort. It really has to be this kind of push-pull between the teacher and the student, but knowing that the student doesn't come in naturally understanding how to develop a driving question. So literally the learning outcome here at Avison is I can consistently and independently develop an open-ended driving question. So anything that's required to do personalized learning, any skill a child needs to actually participate in their own learning, we also think has to be taught. So there's no more of this, well, they just don't work really well independently. He's not so motivated. That's not an option at our school. It's our job to teach those skills. So this is actually a rubric, and as you scroll down, you'll see there are literally sentence starters to help a student learn how to develop a driving question. So this is just one of many documents, and believe me, I don't take credit for it. My staff is fantastic, and they're constantly coming up with tools to figure out how to help a student participate in their learning. It does not come naturally, and Allison, you may have been off earlier when we were talking about that. But it literally has to be taught, and then it's a collaborative effort to figure that out. So every time we say it depends, oh, can all students develop driving questions? It depends on the student. Do all students excited and interested in a passion? It depends. So I know that doesn't sound like it's very inspiring because it is messy, and I think we talked about in the first webinar. It is messy, but it's so rich when you sit down and have a conversation with a student and start to have this push-pull dialogue back and forth. The process itself is fantastic.
Yeah, I want to build on what you're saying. So I think if it's going to be in this weird nebulous space of it depends, I'll give you a little bit of sort of a bright spot, is that students don't really trust this initially at all. They believe that it's just something somebody told them to try. And so I think it's really important that there's a level of consistency, right? So if you care about my student group in this 2-week period, why don't you care about it all the time, right? And so the notion is that if we're trying to build a level of respect, if we're trying to build an opportunity as educators for students to go shoulder to shoulder with us in the creation process, and what Kate's vision is of the development of a driving question and the pursuit of that, then how can we make sure that that's what normal, regular looks like? And that's what Kate does so brilliantly in the charter school, because they actually have the opportunity to do that on a regular basis. So whether it's sort of the pursuit of a genius hour, whether it's the notion of students being able to choose a text and read it and make sense of it regardless of how they're making sense of it, there are these notions that it has to be what part of what normal looks like, as opposed to it being a special event.
Can I just drill in on that one a little bit? You made some interesting points there, and maybe our audience isn't necessarily clear on what that be. One of the pieces of feedback here, and I'll put a couple of them together, is this sounds interesting. For instance, Kate, you've been set up since the beginning for personalized mastery learning. How does this happen in mainstream schools? Where are the opportunities to do this? Because this sounds like it would be quite a challenge in mainstream curriculum. I'll call it mainstream curriculum and leave it there. Hopefully one of you can grab that. So can you give examples, tangible examples of what that would look like in a school that's not necessarily set up to do that in its entirety, to do personalized mastery learning right from the ground up?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I can go.
Oh, go ahead, Allison.
No, you go first. I'll go after.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think, and that's why I wanted to show this example of project-based learning. And to me, if obviously in our school we're doing it all the time, so students have foundational outcomes and interest outcomes, and we're doing it. We're really, the idea of personalized mastery learning is it drives. It's the one thing that we focus on and that we promise to our parents and to our kids. So we are doing all the time. And I think that's important for people to be able to see where it can get to. But if I was, and when I do go work with schools that are saying, hey, we just want to try this out, there's nothing better than a project. And again, that's why I showed the template. I think even if there's a certain, I think Allison's right, it does become the new normal of how you talk to students and how you frame questions, even if it is, like Allison said, a biology lesson. There is a shift in allowing the students to participate with you, again, in that kind of push-pull way. But if you really are unsure how to do the nuance of that, or to, then I think just do a project. And it can start out whole class, and I think what we'd like to see is that it's more teacher-directed initially, and then allow the students to start to let go. So maybe the first project is more teacher-directed, and we develop the driving question together. And we go through it all together, but make that driving question at least involve the whole class with that, so that it really is relevant. And then maybe by project number 2, there's a few kids who are ready to kind of break off and start developing their own driving question and take it somewhere. But some kids still need a little bit more development there. But there's nothing better than a good project to get kids excited about what they're researching and excited about what they're sharing and what they're going to, bring in an authentic audience to see at the end. If the kids know somebody who really is a scientist is going to come in and see what we did, right there jacks up the relevancy of the project. So I think a good project, I mean, Allison, you can jump on that, but I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. So another example, I had the privilege of working with Madison Public Schools, and one of the ideas that they crafted 2 days ago is the redesign of their civics course. And it really honors personalized learning. So the traditional civics content of really doing a close examination of the founding documents, checks and balances, 3 branches of government. They're doing that, but they're doing it in a way that it's trained by the student. So the student has to identify a problem that's of value, that's worth studying. It can be a local problem, a national problem, or a global problem. And they're thinking hard about why it's significant. So their driving question really is, what's the problem? Why is it such a big deal to me? And then based on that, they have to think about that problem through the lens of a couple of tensions, like individual versus the common good, like the notion of the public support or public opinion. That's a second theme. So they're trying to think about traditional content through the lens of a problem that they are interested or passionate about. So that's how you can reframe the entire course from a personalized learning perspective.
Yeah, I think that from a systems perspective, I think Allison's right. I think that'll be something we talk about in the next webinar when we talk about capital and what you're willing to dedicate, which resources you're willing to dedicate as a system to move to personalized learning. So it's on both levels. I'm sure we have folks on the call right now, just a teacher who wants to try some personalized learning in their classroom, and then we hopefully, have districts and larger organizations who are interested in how to make the shift over. So there's my depends word again. It does kind of depend on the size of your organization and what you're trying to do and the kids that are in front of you. But overall, you can't go wrong if you're finding very relevant information, topics themes, however you want to use that, and developing a really great question to go with. You know, one of the best ways to help kids understand what a good driving question is, Darren, you have another slide for me, is just to let them talk about themselves. There's no better there's no better topic for a student than to talk about themselves. So I think I have some example driving questions around discovery of self that are in there, and it's just a great way to get kids really involved in the learning process. You can sneak in the learning in all kinds of ways. You can sneak in those standards really in so many different ways if you let kids really start to just you know, think about what they're passionate about. And again, maybe I'm back to the teenager thread and some of the narcissism of a teenager, but there's nothing better than them talking about themselves to learn about what good driving questions look like.
So, Kate, I'm going to just ask a question on this, because this is it's starting to spark a little conversations here and comments. Is, one of them that's coming up here is, what do parents think about this? And I think it leads to something else that I'm curious to ask you about, is that if the kids are doing their own thing, or they pick these and they've come up with some great things that they're working on, how do you measure this? If they're, so let me try this again. If kids are doing their own thing, how do I evaluate performance? How do we measure personalized learning? Perhaps Allison, maybe you can give us a response first, and then we'll ask Kate about some practical examples.
Sure. I mean, I have a couple of rubrics that I can send along for the good of the order that actually do demonstrate how you measure this. So regardless of the content topic the students are pursuing, you can measure things like their capacity to think critically, their ability to collaborate on a given task in service to a broader goal, their ability to communicate with attention to clarity and precision. So those are pieces that you can measure regardless of the topic or the question or the idea they're pursuing. And that's relatively wide open in terms of rubrics. There are a ton of rubrics around that demonstrate the measurement of that. I think the question is also to make sure that students are familiar with the parameters of the assignment as well. So it's incredibly important when students, and again, this helps parents as well, when students feel like they're sort of on their own as independent learners trying to make sense of an idea or a question or a problem, they have some kind of guiding set of criteria that they're accountable for. And they also know that if they feel a little lost or they need a little assistance, they know who to go to for help, whether it's the teacher advisor or an expert or a peer.
Yeah, and I can't speak, I mean, Allison hit it right on the head. And what she's saying, and I think, to maybe correct your question a little bit, Darren, is, how do we evaluate it, or I evaluate it? I think the we is right, and I hope the we includes the student, and that's what Allison was talking about. So if the student has a clear rubric, at Edutect, of course, we use the learning board, which is kind of, it's our online system that shows every foundational outcome we want the students to learn. It has suggestions for interest learning outcomes, although they can write their own interest learning outcomes. But it's such a visual representation, as I mentioned before, that this is a collaborative process. The rubric is clear, and it may be, most of the time, the rubric may probably be developed by an AVISN advisor / teacher. But even that, a student could be even involved in developing the rubric. If they're definitely going off in an area or an outcome, they're creating their own learning outcome, which is an interest outcome, they may develop their own rubric. But that's so important what Allison just said. It just needs to be super clear of what proficiency would look like, and the rubric helps with that. Exemplars help with that. Just conversations, like we talked about before, having an authentic audience helps. Someone who's in the field and can give the student feedback either along the way, along the learning pathway, or at least by, in the end, when the product is being presented or shared, or the learning is being shared. So it can't be how do I evaluate. It has to be shifted to how we evaluate, and it's an equal endeavor between the student and the teacher.
Fantastic.
And many,
Oh,
and many of the school districts that I'm consulting with right now are actually doing personalized learning in a pretty powerful way. So they have an opportunity for students to pursue their own driving questions and engage in that question and design what the product or the performance might look like. But they also have the same set of measures that are governed as well by relatively traditional performance-based tests. So again, you're getting a collection of evidence. Some are driven by a student's creation or co-creation with the teacher, and others are designed by the teacher. But still, they're getting meaningful feedback on the same set of criteria.
fantastic. This is a great question. It's come from our audience. Sorry, I don't have the person's first name, so we'll call them B. Clay at the moment because that's how they've come through. But I think it's a great question, and probably one of the good ones to kind of round out your comments as well, hopefully, Kate and Allison. Here's the question. Do exams and results not force teachers to teach prescribed knowledge, which leads school having to change how they measure success and how to bring this in line with their vision for independent lifelong learners? How can schools or institutions demonstrate their effectiveness without relying on these boards and tests? So in the context of what you're saying, how do you see that this comes together?
Oh, Allison, I'll let you take this one.
Okay, you want to go first?
No,
You want me?
you do more work.
All right. More than yeah. So I'm more than happy to respond. So the great Jay McTighe continues to assert that when it comes to assessment, we have to think about a portfolio. So, and a portfolio is a demonstration of key measures of performance. And one key measurement can still be a standardized assessment. I think the real question, and there's a real shift in public opinion these days, of when that one assessment becomes too important, it crowds out not just student creativity, but teacher creativity. It makes people feel hampered by taking a risk, pursuing an idea. So when it comes to answering the question that Darren just addressed, we're really thinking about not the elimination of a standardized assessment, but not being so hyper-focused on only the prescribed content, knowledge, and skill. That really, when it's taught, is done in a very recall and rote type of manner. So we value fluency, but we also value conceptual understanding and application. And we value that not only in the assignments that the teacher designs or sample test items that are released, but we also value it based on what the students are interested in. So yes, there is a level of rote knowledge and fluency that a student needs if they're trying to make sense of a technical manual because they want to rebuild a car engine, or they're trying to make sense of the technical aspects of designing a choreography.
Yeah, and I think do we have a couple minutes left?
We do. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So yeah, so I just I think a great part of both Allison and I know that she's thinking on the systems level, which is she's absolutely right. We have to start thinking of assessment as a portfolio, and there's nothing wrong with a certain amount of standardized assessment being a piece of the puzzle of a student's performance. And I'm thinking more again on a teacher that's on this call right now who's thinking, but what about me? I've got my kids have got to take these tests at the end of the year. What do I do? And I think it goes back to that trust piece we talked about in the previous webinar. I want I want the systems to start trusting teachers more, and that's what Allison's out there diligently working with districts and getting them to see differently what teachers need to do to inspire their kids. And first of all, is trusting teachers to know that if I hit the foundational pieces, if I do engage my kids in learning in other ways, and as much as I can make this as personalized and relevant, they have to trust that they will see they will see an increase in students' motivation and scores, even on the standardized tests. But don't teach to those tests. Just know that your job as the artist in the room, and it's a science and an art, teaching, we know this, is to sneak in kind of all that actual multiple choice kind of, the kind of things kids are going to be tested on at the end of the year, whatever that standardized, the board that they have to take. You can sneak that in, but you can do it in a way that's more relevant to students, and you have to trust that A is the right thing to do, and B will actually help kids increase their even standardized test scores, because they really will be engaged in their learning.
Fantastic. I'm just going to get you to move to sort of summarizing our remarks because we're coming to the close of our time. An interesting comment that's out here, I think, might be something for you to riff off of, I guess, is a Jay McTighe quote coming up from, it looks like one of our schools that's out in Malaysia, is, "It takes banks for a river to flow, and it seems like this is knowing where to put the banks for student ideas." So, Allison, do you have some closing remarks for those that are around the world listening to us tonight about context and how we bring it all together with everything we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I love that notion that it takes banks for a river to flow. And I think really this goes to the heart of the relationship and the role between the teacher and the student. The teacher offers the parameters, the banks that the river flows in. But I think the idea is that too often the students feel trapped. The students feel like they are ushered along. And this is the moment when it comes to context, to have students sit down at the co-creation table with us and really think hard about what are you fascinated by, what do you wonder about, and have them help with the design. It not only reveals their interest in their ideas, it also gives them the understanding that what you think and what you say and what you believe matters. And it opens up the learning in a way that's, just unbelievably amazing. And I think that's what you see when you walk in state school. It's coming out of the port of the classroom. And that's what magic looks like. That's what joy and restorative learning looks like. And it starts with the dynamic of the role between the teacher and the student.
Yeah, and I think I love that quote too. And I think that's what we've been getting at today. It's our job to not only provide the banks initially for them, for that river to flow, but to teach them how to build the banks. Because there is a time they will be not in my classroom or not in our school. And they have to learn, for them to be a part of that process, because they may want to go somewhere else. They're not heading where we think they should be heading. So that's why it's this, again, mentorship, apprenticeship model, whatever words you want to choose. And that's such a great, if you're literally building the banks, right, if you use that metaphor, you're teaching a student how to build them while you're building them with them. And you're modeling that, and then you're letting go. And letting them go and see where that river is going to go for that child and kind of follow along with them as a support. Some kids are going to need you to stay on that journey for longer than others, but the goal is that all of them can continue to kind of build their own pathway or, I guess, river in that metaphor.
Well, I must thank both of you as we wrap up the evening. I think both of you are actually quite inspirational on this whole piece, and not only have been inspiring to us, but I think you've given us guidance on how students can find inspiration and have that govern along, as well as how you bring those banks in to make those student ideas worthwhile, and how to measure that. There's been such breadth of what you've talked about tonight. So I want to thank you for that and sharing the information and the examples with us. And I wanted to thank everyone else that's in the audience for your participation and your great questions. I know there's quite a few questions out there that we didn't get to. If we didn't get to them, please don't worry. We can coordinate with Kate and Allison, and we can answer them in upcoming webinars. And we're hoping that, of course, you'll join us for our next webinar in this series, which is scheduled for the 18th of November. And if you're located in the United States, and for those of you in Southeast Asia and Australia who live in the land of tomorrow, that'll be the 19th of November. And that webinar will focus on culture. So what is expected from me? What is expected from everyone else? How does that shape the work that we do together? So during that session, Allison and Kate are going to talk about the creation and growth of a culture where students can produce their best work. And to that end, we must create and sustain a daily culture immersed in exploration, problem solving, and failure where students are active, alive, and growing right before our eyes. They will also share the key parameters that create trust and innovation in the classroom: self-direction, feedback, and collaboration. So once again, thanks very much, Kate, and for being out there and coming through so loud and clear. And Allison, thanks for bearing through and working through in the place that you are. We really appreciate you persevering and giving you the insights that you have been able to share with us tonight.
All right, thank you, Darren.
All right. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next webinar. Thanks very much.